morning, I had the wonderful opportunity of sitting down and being fed by Dr. Jack Pinter. Jack, come on up.
Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. Normally, when I preach, how many times have I preached? What, four times? Five, something like that. Normally, I preach from the New Testament, but today, by God's help, I'm going to tackle a psalm. And not just any psalm, but one of the most well-known of the psalms, Psalm 23. This psalm is one that children often memorize in Awanas or Sunday school. Maybe you haven't memorized. Who's memorized Psalm 23? Okay, so lots of you. So you all know it. And if you don't, I would encourage you to. I often find myself reciting its words in my mind. I learned it in the King James Version many years ago. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table for me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So, what wonderful. So, I still remember it in the King James, yeah. Of course, there's very good reason that this psalm has been a favorite over the years, century, even millennia. It was written 3,000 years ago. Okay? The words of this short psalm resonate for those of us who trust in the Lord. In hard times, we can hear that the Lord provides provision and guidance and comfort and presence, even abundance, both now and in the future. Maybe you've heard one or more sermons on this psalm before, but maybe hearing from someone else will give you some different insights and wisdom on the gem in the Psalms, on this gem in the Psalms. First of all, though, I'm going to sing a version of the 23rd Psalm. It's called the New 23rd. It was put to music by Ralph Carmichael many, many years ago. The words are based on the Living Bible's paraphrase of Psalm 23, which was first published in 1967. And I think the song itself came out in 1969. George Beverly Shea, anybody remember him? Yes. He made the song popular. I believe he sang it in some of Billy Graham's crusades. Right? And I've loved this psalm, or this version of the song for years. And so Cheryl is going to accompany me, and I'm going to sing the New 23rd. Because the Lord is my shepherd. I love the way that song starts. Because the Lord is my shepherd, I have everything that I need. Let's carefully look at this psalm. If you have your Bible or your phone, I encourage you to look at your favorite translation. I'm going to translate from my Hebrew text because I've been studying Hebrew and I like it. Okay? There's some very interesting observations that come from looking at this text. This psalm is a psalm of David. That's what it says right at the beginning, a psalm of David. David, and he wrote about half of the psalms that we have in the book of Psalms. He wrote psalms for praise. He wrote psalms for expressing faith and trust. He wrote psalms complaining to God, for confession, and for receiving forgiveness. This psalm is one of those expressing faith and trust. But it is a unique one in the Psalms for its perspective. Only here is God called a shepherd. Though God calls on God to shepherd Israel in Psalm 28. And the perspective is that of a shepherd. And who is that shepherd? David. And David is calling God his shepherd here. We don't know when David actually wrote this psalm during his life, but he was likely older, having come close to death and having faced enemies, because he talks about death and he talks about enemies in this psalm. In any case, at some point he was looking back and he was thinking about growing up as a shepherd. And he thought, wow, what I did as a shepherd is a lot like what God does for us. And so he pens these words. How God fulfills that role personally. And of course, it's come down that God performs that role for Israel and for the church and for each one of us. This is going to be a teaching sermon, okay? A teaching sermon. My goal and hope is that when you remember this psalm, that its words will be a deep source of trust and strength and comfort and hope and even resolve in our chaotic world. So David, the shepherd, is thinking about shepherding, and he's thinking about God. Of course, he often thinks about God, and we have so many psalms that he's written straight to God. This psalm is very interesting, though, because it's got a lot of I's in it. So David is applying this directly to himself. Okay? By the way, if you're reading the Psalms, one very interesting thing to do is to notice all the pronouns. Okay? If you're ever reading a psalm, notice the pronouns. Is it I? Is it you? Is it we? Is it they? And those will give you clues about the psalm. And in this psalm, it is no different. Here we start with I and third person, he. Okay? And then later on, it changes to I and you. Very interesting how this psalm ends up transitioning. So David begins thinking about the Lord. And then he realizes, Lord, I can talk straight to you here. Okay, so it's very, very interesting there. So he begins with this. Yahweh is my shepherd. He uses the covenant name of God here. Okay, he doesn't say God is my shepherd. He uses the name of God. We translate that Lord in our translations is usually capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. Stands for the divine name. Yahweh, my shepherd. It's just two words. There's no is there. Puts them right next to each other. My shepherd. Okay. Right from the beginning, David takes on this one-to-one relationship with God. He realizes that he is personally in relationship with God, and that is a day-to-day relationship. That's what a shepherd does for his sheep. And David is the sheep. David is the sheep. The Lord is my shepherd. Now, what does that mean? Well, David begins then to unpack this psalm by talking about what does a shepherd do. Many of you have probably heard this talked about before. let me just tell it to you again, maybe with a few details you haven't heard before. First of all, he says, well, in the translations, I shall not want, I lack nothing. In the song I just sang, I have everything I need. So David, as a sheep, realizes that the shepherd is the one that provides everything. And as a human, David is thinking about all the ways that God provides for him. Not only food, not only drink, not only shelter, but in every single way. And as we go through the psalm, we're going to see that. I lack nothing. I had a friend who asked me about the psalm this summer. He said, is David hoping this, or does he actually believe it? And I said to my friend, he actually believed it. This was something that David put his entire life on. When he said this was ground zero for him. He believed that God provided every single thing that he needed. No matter how much he failed, God was faithful. God was faithful. Now he begins to give us a few images from shepherding. First of all, he says, he causes me to lie down in green pastures. Has anybody been to Israel here? Anybody been to Israel? Lynn's been. Nobody else? So David grew up around Bethlehem, just south of Jerusalem. If you walk outside of Bethlehem, you look around and all you see is, well, it looks like desert. Okay? It's to the east, it's just wilderness. When we hear green pastures, we think about the green grass that grows around here. Okay? Or if you go back east, you got green everywhere, right? There's lots and lots of rain. Not there. Not a lot of rain. And so there's not a lot that's green. So when he's talking about green pastures, he's talking about the little bit of green that's there for sheep to eat. Okay? And once again, if you go to Israel, you can see these shepherds around dotting the hills, still herding their sheep. And you say, well, what are they eating? Well, the shepherd knows where to take them to eat. Okay? Left on their own devices, the sheep are going to die. Because there's just not that much there. So he knows where they go. It says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. In other words, he's the one that gets me there and says, you need to eat here. And he follows that up with water. So you've got food, you've got water. Okay? He leads me beside still waters. He leads me to still waters. If there's now, once again, water, there's not much water. Okay? So these still waters would have been places where water had been probably stored. Okay? Or dammed up from maybe the spring rains that come in, and then they're kept. And once again, the shepherd knows where those are. And he takes them, and there's still water so the sheep can drink. So, food, water. What's he follow up with? He restores my soul. When you're hungry, when you're thirsty, what do you need? You need food and water to restore our soul. David is looking at this and thinking, it's not just food and water. Okay? God gives me everything that I need for my soul to be revived. He restores my soul. We can even translate that he restores my life. That's really what this idea of soul means. He restores my life. This really talks so far in this psalm kind of about the day-to-day. The day-to-day. Okay? God takes care of us. And we can look in the past, we can look at now, and we can trust in the future that God is going to take care of us no matter what. Now there's a turn in this psalm. David begins to think about, what does God do beyond just the day-to-day? And he begins thinking further about what the shepherd does. How does the shepherd lead them from place to place? Well, he knows the roads. He knows the paths that get from one place to the next. When they run out of food in one place, he's got to know where to go next. When they run out of water in one place, he's got to know where to go next. Okay? And he needs to take them along a path that they can easily go. Okay? And so here we have the next turn in this psalm. He guides me in paths. Now this is different from he leads me beside still waters. He guides me, he leads me on paths. So this is the walking along these paths, but not just any paths. He guides me on the right paths. Okay, the right paths. The Hebrew word here is tzedek, and it means right or just or correct. And so we get this sense here that God is not just leading David for provisions, he's leading David in a just life. He's guiding him along those paths that lead to life, not to death. Of course, we have that contrast in just a minute. David is looking at God's leading in his life, and David's done all sorts of things that are wrong. If you read 1st and 2nd Samuel, you'll see how many times David screwed up in one way or the other. But God never stopped guiding David. If David went off this way, he leads him back this way. David went off this way, he leads him back this way. Okay? Just like the parable of the sheep in the Gospels, right? The shepherd goes after that sheep who'd gone astray. He guides me in right paths. Okay? But why does he do that? For the sake of his name. For the sake of his name. Whose name? The name of Yahweh. God's name. God is the one who is ultimately the focus of this psalm. It is God's glory, God's reputation, and God is going to lead his people on those paths so that his name might be glorified. For the sake of his name. Not for David's righteousness, not so that David can look good. This has nothing to do with David. This psalm has everything to do with God. Everything to do with God's faithfulness. So he guides me in paths of righteousness for the sake of his name. This same verb is used when God guided the children of Israel in the wilderness by day with the cloud and by night with the fire. He's leading them to where he wants them to go, to the promised land. Not that this path is always easy. And this is where David makes a turn. Even though I should go through the valley of the death shadow. Once again, if you ever get the chance to go to Israel, or just look up the Judean wilderness on Google and look at some of the photos, you'll see that the mountain or that the valleys are these deep, deep V-shaped valleys that are just very treacherous. It is easy to fall. It's easy to get hurt. It's very easy to get lost. And when you're down in them, you're in a shadow, because it's hard for the sun to get down there. Well, David's been through many of these. He's led the sheep through them. He knows the danger that comes from them, from wild animals, could be even robbers, hiding. David, of course, is thinking about his life and about some of the many travails that he's been through when his life has been threatened, either by King Saul or by the Philistines or other cases. Even though I should go through the valley of the shadow of death, and he knows he's been through them. What does he say? I will fear no evil. Evil is lurking. It is there. It's all around him. The person not trusting in God would be scared to death. It's the valley of the shadow of death. But just like at the beginning when he says, the Lord is my shepherd, here he says, I will fear no evil. And why is that? The next phrase says it all. For you are with me. And here David changes from third person to second person. For you, God, are with me. It's not me just going through that alone. You are with me. You are my shepherd. You are leading me. You're right there with me. Emmanuel, God with us. And this is with me. Once again, this is a very deeply, deeply personal psalm. Of course, that makes it a very personal psalm for us too, doesn't it? Are you afraid? God, you're with me. There is no reason for me to be afraid. What's the worst thing that can happen? I can die. But you're with me. Period. And he follows this up. You're with me. Your rod and your staff. Your rod and your staff. They comfort me. So God's presence is there, and God uses all of the tools at his disposal. Get back here. Come on. Come in. The rod, poke. The staff, pull. I may wander, but God is going to pull me back. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love, the song says, the hymn says. But God's there to pull us back at every single step along the way. You're with me. Your rod, your staff. They comfort me. That didn't sound like comfort, but it is. When God does what God needs to do to pull us back, it's a comfort. Because you know God's there. You know that God is with me. When he does what a loving God does, to bring us back to him. Well, now David just goes off. He begins to think, Lord, not you just don't guard and guide me with your staff and your rod. You go way beyond that, God. You set a table for me in the presence of my enemies. Enemies. David had lots of them. And not just the Philistines, not just Saul, his own son became his enemy. He had lots of it. People wanted him to fall. Where was the only place that he had to turn? God. He says, you have set a table for me in the presence of my enemies. Now, something very interesting here, if we think about this. If God sets a table for him in the presence of his enemies, something I thought about a while back is the enemies can either choose to remain enemies, and David's there with God at the table, or they could choose to join David at the table and no longer be his enemies. So there's really an invitation here. God, you are so good to me, and if my enemies would just see it, they could know you too. Your blessings are not just for me personally, they're for everybody to see. It's an invitation to the table, if they choose. Of course, they can choose to remain enemies too. That's their choice. Just like anybody before God. And now he thinks about, okay, well, what happens before we eat? Well, if you're a guest, the host will anoint you. He cleans you up, and David says, you anoint my head with oil. This verb is very interesting. You fatten my head with oil is literally what this means. Okay? You pour oil over my head, and it's amazing. I feel rich. I feel fat. Okay? Not in the bad sense of the word, but in every way, Lord, it's wonderful. It's wonderful here. And he follows that up. My cup is full. My cup is full. I can't put anything else in my cup. It's full. We probably should think about the more I drink, the more it's full. It's always full. I can't overdrink this cup because it's full. It's a table that's God set. It's his oil. We probably can think about the Holy Spirit. The oil of the Holy Spirit flowing over us. Here. God's Spirit is there. Okay. This in the presence of my enemies. They see it. They see what blessings God gives for those who trust him. So now David gets to the end of the psalm, and he is speeding up. He's speeding up. He's so full of joy here, he can hardly stand it. Surely, goodness, tov, Well, hesed is goodness and loving kindness. Goodness and mercy is how the King James translates it. It's hesed is this love of God. You've heard of agape in the New Testament. It's kind of the same idea. It's this love that God gives that just doesn't stop. Surely goodness and loving kindness, God's covenant love that He has made with His people. What does goodness and loving kindness do? It pursues me. It runs after me. Wait, I thought enemies pursued him. No, well, they may. But David's looking and says, no, God's mercy and His goodness are running after me. I can't get away from them, no matter what. Here they come. God is pursuing me. Everything He has. I can't get away from Him. I cannot get away from Him. So he ends by talking about God's home, God's house. We can think of the temple, the tabernacle. There's the tabernacle in the time of David. He's talked in another psalm about, I'd rather spend one day in the house of the Lord than 1,000 elsewhere. Okay? And here he's saying, and I will dwell. It's dwell, it might be return. The verbs are very close here. But I will dwell, I will return to the house of the Lord for all the days of my life. David is thinking about wanting to be in God's presence at every moment for the rest of his life. No matter where he is, he imagines himself right there in the tabernacle, in the presence of God. Every moment, for the rest of his days. It's a beautiful, beautiful thought. He, you, the house. David weaves through this. And so, think of all the different images. He started off talking about shepherding, and now he's in the house of the Lord. Okay? So, you have a wandering of his mind, but every single image leads to something else, leads to something else. Until now, this is the true feast. Feasting in God's house forever. Feasting in God's house forever. This is something that I individually, you individually, can pray every day, can think about every day, no matter all of the things going on around us. No matter what. This is a psalm between David and his God. And we can put my referring to me and my referring to any of you right in that psalm. I want to end up with another thought here. Have you ever thought about Jesus quoting the Psalms, saying the Psalms? Every Jew said the Psalms. This was their psalm book. This was their psalm book. The psalm right before Psalm 23 is the psalm that begins, my God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22. And Jesus quoted, of course, that verse from Psalm 22:1 from the cross. You know, he quoted another psalm from the cross. Right before he died, he quoted the verse from Psalm 33:5. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. In the Orthodox tradition, from what I understand, Jesus prayed Psalm 22 to Psalm 33 while he was on the cross. Recited all those psalms. So, have you thought about Jesus reciting Psalm 23 on the cross? Jesus, hanging in the deepest shadow of death, reciting, Yahweh is my shepherd. I lack nothing. Even at the moment that Jesus is dying, his faith in God is complete. He's looking forward to the feast that he will have with God in spite of his enemies who put him right there. His cup runneth over. He'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is the trust that this psalm calls us to. No matter what happens today, or tomorrow, or the next day, God is with me, with us, to provide, to guide, to protect, and to prosper us till the moment we meet.
My thinking with Psalm 22 is a prophecy of Jesus on the cross and the pain that he suffered. And Psalm 23 is a personal testimony of David, a personal testimony of his personal relationship with the Lord, and that we can all have now because of what Jesus did on the cross for us. I don't think 23 following 22 is any mistake.